How many understand that we're in Christmas season? It almost looks like it, doesn't it? And when we go and talk about the Christmas season, you would think that we're all full of joy and everyone is ready and excited about Christmas. But, you know, it's interesting. I've talked to a few individuals, and what they have said to me is, it's strange this year. I should already be in the Christmas spirit, but this has happened. But my family situation is bad. I have children that are in stress or they're about ready to be separated. And all of these things are piling upon me. And you know what? I don't even feel like going out and shopping. You know, and that may be something interesting if a man said it to me. But a woman said that. They're not interested in shopping. Can you imagine the incredible turmoil that must be going on in a life? No, you know, we can laugh about it, and that's really what I want to do today is cause joy to come into our hearts. Because when the stresses of life are piled upon us, and when we're in the midst of all of the things that come, even during the Christmas season, we could end up having the joy of the season, the joy of knowing that we're believers. You know what? As believers, we don't only have joy at Christmas time, we have joy all of the time. And the reason why we can have joy all of the time is that Jesus brings us joy. The reason why the joy comes at Christmas time is because we talk about Jesus coming and he's born. But as believers, we have the presence of Jesus in our lives every single day. And it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It doesn't matter if there's situations that are causing stress, depression even. We have Jesus. And so today we're going to be talking about being in the presence of Jesus, and as a byproduct, just knowing that we are in his presence. As we walk hand in hand with Jesus, a byproduct naturally comes to us. It's called joy. If we look through the scriptures, everyone that Jesus came in contact with, he brought joy. I'll give you an example. You know, there's one surefire way of ruining the mood at a funeral. You raise the dead. Hello? You know, you can't have a good funeral if you don't have a dead person. And Jesus would show up, and he would raise this person from the dead. And you know, all of these paid wailers and mourners, all of a sudden they had nothing to cry about. No one expected. The natural byproduct of being in the presence of Jesus, naturally, spontaneously, is joy. Even if you have a good reason this season of being sad, I'm going to give you even a better reason of having joy. Jesus. And so let's go to the scripture this morning. In Luke chapter 2, it's the Christmas story. And you say, Pastor, we didn't read Luke chapter 2 this last week. And your sermon always comes out of the text that we read. I'll get there. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, do not be afraid. I bring you terrible news that will cause you to be depressed forever. Notice that's not what it says. And it's not that I have a different version on my notes than is up here. I have the same version. I just threw that out to make sure you were paying attention. Because what the angels say is, do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy. What kind of joy? Great joy. Great joy. So what does that mean? What is great joy? I mean, joy, I see some Christians, and this is their joy. I watch them. And then they get frustrated. They get angry at the person that cut them off. And their spontaneous joy that was like this before turns into like this. This is their joy. Their joy. But now we're not just talking about that normal joy that maybe you have. We're talking about great joy. So if this was joy before, does that mean it's really? We're going the wrong way, aren't we? The words that the angel speaks is that it's going to cause great joy. And so we as the people of God need to be the answer to that. If it's going to cause great joy and now we've received Jesus, what are we doing when we walk around downcast? What are we doing? We're actually declaring to the world that obviously we don't think Jesus is with us. Because if Jesus is with us, it's going to cause great joy. He goes on. It's going to be great joy for all the people. Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. Suddenly, a great company of the heavenly hosts appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, I've got to wonder, at that moment when a great company shows up, they were scared about one angel. And the one angel says, don't be afraid. I'm here to bring you good news of great joy that will cause great joy. And so here are these shepherds. They're hearing it. But I have a feeling that others are hearing it as well. There must have been a multitude of angels camped around. I mean, hello. Here we have the Son of God born in a manger. These are the ones that are announcing it. But, if the Son of God is born, there's going to be angels everywhere. Hello? These angels are everywhere. And when they hear this herald angel, if you think about Charlie Brown or the cartoons or what have you, they'll talk about that and they say, I didn't know that angels had names. This was Harold, the angel. We're not talking about Harold. He was a proclaiming angel. And he comes in and he says, there's going to be great joy. It's going to cause this great joy amongst all people. And when he says this, all of a sudden, all of these angels that before were hidden, they come out of hiding because they can't help but also express the great joy that's permeating the earth because Jesus is born. And this would have been a surprise, I'm sure, to all of the shepherds that were there just watching sheep. They were used to this dark scene. They could see a wolf coming at a mile away, even in the dark, because that was their job. And then when all of a sudden, the light of all of the glory of these angels showing up and singing this song, they say, all of a sudden, these great angels show up and they start saying, glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace to those on whom his favor rests. When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said one to another, let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about. So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. So when we talk about these angels showing up, they're declaring that they have great joy. But you know what? They were declaring it in the middle of a stressful situation. Because those shepherds were there out in the fields and they were living the real life. How many have ever had the real life touch you? It happens sometimes, doesn't it? And the shepherds were there. They were a part of Israel. And Israel was under Roman domination. If you would say, let's have a good day, it would probably be not the best day when you are under somebody else's rule. And then on top of that, they were living in a situation where emotionally, physically, and spiritually, things weren't great. Jesus, when he comes on the scene and he begins to teach and preach, what does he do about those Pharisees? Does he pat them on the back saying, you're doing a great job? I don't think so. He goes to the Pharisees and he says, you brood of vipers. They were living in a situation where the religious leaders had not only done what the Romans did, but even worse. The Romans came in and put rules upon them, external physical rules. But then the Pharisees came along and they made all of these spiritual rules to bind them up, to make life inexpressible, unable to move forward. They were in a bad situation. If anyone had cause to be depressed, it was probably these people, the people of Israel. And they would go through the motions. How many have ever had a life when you just didn't feel like getting up and you would go through the motions? You didn't have this wonderful joy that was permeating you. You just went through the motions and you say, I'm sure this is going to come to pass one day. And sometimes we have to pull ourselves up and we have to do that. But the shepherds, they would have had even a more difficult time. because these angels go to shepherds. Now, if that was the case amongst all of the Israelites, I want to paint for you the picture of the shepherds. The shepherds were the worst. The shepherds had a lonely life, had a life that was set on. And you know what? Basically, when you get hired out as a shepherd, you say, I want you to know something. Your life is worth less to me than the sheep. If a wolf comes, you sacrifice yourself over the sheep. This is what they were valued at. The shepherds were not welcome in town. They had this, how should we put it, odor? And when they would show up, the people would listen to them, and they would say, you're not worth even listening to, because they talked like people that were uneducated. We're talking about a generation in which there was a great deal of racism. Racism. Remember when Jesus was taken into the courtyard of the high priest, and Peter, his disciple, the future apostle Peter, follows right into the courtyard, and he's warming himself there by the fire. One of the things that he is told is that you must be one of his disciples because your accent gives you away. You speak like a Galilean. They would listen to words, and if the person wasn't educated, if the person didn't put the words together quite right, they were judged immediately. This was the situation there. And so if anyone had a reason to be discouraged, depressed, and sad, it was probably these shepherds. Matter of fact, I will point out something to you. People who are sad move slower. I don't know if you've ever noticed it. Our body gestures give away how we're feeling. And somebody that said, whereas somebody with joy and a purpose has longer strides, has purpose driven in their every motion. And I could imagine as the shepherds typically would hear word from the owners of the sheep, the flock, and they would say, I need somebody to go into town and do this. One shepherd would say to the other, not me, I did it last time. And the other shepherd would say, no, I have seniority. I've been here longer. And finally, the one poor shepherd would be chosen to go in. And he would go in. This is how he'd go in. I get to go to town. Great. Everyone is going to judge me. I'm going to try not to say anything. Maybe I need a note. I'll show them what I want. And they won't hear me speak. And maybe I can pass it from a distance so they don't smell me as well. And this would be what was going on in his mind. And so when it was time to go to town, it was never a time of great joy. It was a time of stress. The shepherds, according to the culture, didn't even deserve the attention. But the shepherds here get the great news. The angels come to the shepherds and say, I have good news that will bring great joy. You know what they do? They look at each other. When the shepherds are alone once again and the angels have gone, all of a sudden they look to each other and they say, let's go to town. Let's go to the city. We've got to go and see this great thing that the Lord has made known to us. And you know what I find interesting? The sadness quickly changes. Before, when they would have walked slowly, all of a sudden, everything changes. Everything changes for those shepherds. Now, the scriptures say, and so they hurried off. Shepherds weren't used to hurrying to town. Shepherds were begrudgingly going to town. But now they have this good news that's going to bring great joy to all people. And so they hurry off. And they're walking with purpose. And they're going, oh, I'm going to meet you there. No, I'm going to meet you. And they're walking with just joy in their hearts. Because joy had come in and in one only moment has transformed everything. You know, being with God, being with Jesus, brings joy into your life. I'll propose to you, this is one of the reasons why Jesus makes a statement in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 16. He says, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do. Now I want to remind you, the word hypocrite in those days was an actor. An actor was somebody that would come in and they would have one experience, but they could act in a different way. In other words, the actor could come in and the director say, I need you to act really sad in this particular episode. They come in with all kinds of joy because they have a great job. They have come in because their life is wonderful, and the director says, I need you to be sad. And suddenly, they could have even tears come down their face. And everyone says, wow, how sad. And then when the scene was over, they were joyful again. And so Jesus says, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do. Why would that be an actor's job? Because Jesus is saying, when you're fasting, if you're really fasting, that means that you're now in the presence of God. How could you possibly be sad? That's what he's saying. Don't be a hypocrite. Don't paint your face. If you're really in the presence of God, everyone is going to know it. You can look to the person to your left or to your right and say, you know what, you better tell your face, otherwise people won't know that you're supposed to be happy. We need to have smiles. We need to be filled with joy because we have come out of the presence of God. When you're going out of the church and some go together to eat, now that joy better show up with you. Otherwise, those poor waiters and waitresses, they're going to say, oh boy, these people were suffering before they showed up here. That pastor must have preached too long. They're going to have all kinds of thoughts about us. But if we show up with this joy that's just beaming out of our lives, making its way known through our faces, they're going to say something different. They're going to say, this is real. There is a joy in these people's lives. And Jesus comes, so when you're fasting, don't look like you're sad. And he says, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. In other words, they're doing it because their goal isn't to be in God's presence, but rather to impress other people. If you're fasting, Jesus isn't setting up a new rule that you can't let people know that you're fasting. I understand what scriptures teach. It's because he's saying, make the presence of God your priority. He's not trying to say, I want you to lie to people. You know, some people, I've heard some Christians, you know, Jesus says, when you're fasting, you know, do it in secret. And you're heavenly. I understand what the scriptures say. But Jesus didn't say, I want you to lie to people. I have people, they're fasting, and they've heard the scripture. And you say, here, would you like whatever the person has to offer? In case today, we had 2 people, because it's Christmas time, I guess, bring cake. I didn't want to offend anybody, so I took some of both. And, you know, if you offer somebody cake, and they say to you, no, thank you, I'm not hungry. How hungry do you have to be to have cake? Hello? And so what happens? We end up causing this whole situation where we have a lie coming out of our lives. That's not what Jesus was saying. He's saying draw near to God. And when we're in God's presence, there's going to be joy that's going to hit us. We must have joy while we're fasting. We must have joy while we're in church. We must have joy while we're worshiping. We must have joy while we're praising. We must have joy when we're giving offering. Because we're drawing nearer to Jesus, and when we're in his presence, a natural byproduct is joy. And this is why Jesus makes the statement that he makes here. Joy brings an instant change. When somebody has joy, and you know what, I looked on the internet and YouTube and in different areas, and I even asked Nancy to help me with it, and you know, we just didn't find the right scene. I was going to show a video. You can imagine, though, I think better than the video would show up. Imagine a child at Christmas time opening that present. And that present is something that they have wanted forever. Perhaps a puppy. Perhaps the perfect doll. Perhaps, I don't know, what it might be. If you watch some commercials, it's going to be the man who gets the new Lexus. But what happens? They open this, and in my mind I could just imagine, because I've seen my children at Christmas time, and they open this present, and now all of a sudden it's like they don't even need the present. It caused such joy they can't even control themselves. Energy is infused into them, and they're up there jumping, yeah, and they're jumping up and down, excited about this present, and the present's sitting there on the ground. But that's what joy does. You can think, if you're into sports, of an athlete that just makes the goal, or just makes the putt, or just makes whatever, the basket, and what happens? After they make that touchdown run, and now they are the Super Bowl champions, what do? They go, boy, I'm tired. I want to have to walk slowly back to the other side because, no. All of a sudden, this person who's run all that distance has an infusion of energy, and they're moving with purpose. They're jumping up and down. They're celebrating. They forget that they're breathing hard. How is that possible? Because that's a byproduct of joy. Joy causes us to move in a new and an invigorated manner. And we as the people of God need to have joy shining through us. Our faces change. Your eyes get brighter. You know why they get brighter? Because they get bigger. Think about the person that said, you see mostly their eyelids. They're looking down. But a person with joy, even there, they pull their foreheads up. Not because we want more wrinkles, but because joy comes into our lives. Everything changes when we have joy in our life. So now let's go to a text that we read this last week in Luke chapter 24. In verse 13, we pick up this text after Jesus has been crucified, but also after he's risen from the dead, but the disciples are not sure it really happened. And so here's what the text says. It says, now that same day, what same day? This was the day that the women had come back from the tomb saying, he's alive! And they had all this joy in their lives, right? The women did. But the disciples said, you know what? Women, they're crazy sometimes. They didn't believe him. Even Peter and John had gone and they had seen an empty tomb, but they hadn't seen anything else that would prove something. And so that same day, here's what happens. Two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. Now, that's not overly distant, but at the same time, it's not something you do in just a half hour. They're going to walk, and they're going to get there. But I want to propose to you the way that they were walking. Because we encounter these two disciples as two disciples who are discouraged. They're depressed. They thought something was going to happen, and now they were disappointed. And so as they are walking along, I wonder how long it took them to walk 7 miles. Even though they were coming home. When I greeted a number of you as you came in, one of you were just coming back from 2 weeks away. 2 weeks away. And they said, it was a good trip, but it was good to get back home. You have to imagine these disciples. They've been gone from their house for a while. They had already gone through 3 days after the crucifixion. They were there during the feast there. That was the Passover. And so they're now ready to get back to home. You would think that if you're going home, you start to move a little quicker. I don't know if you grew up in the same situation I grew up in, but my family had a kind of a farm type of a situation. I had horses. You know, it was interesting. You could ride horses and you can go, 2 hours out on this trail. And as soon as you turned around, you'd think that horse was tired, but all of a sudden the pace picked up. The closer you got home, the faster the horse would go. Matter of fact, I remember there was a time when we were little and my brother was 1.5 years younger than I, and he had a horse that would become uncontrollable. We would get about 10 minutes away from the house, he would have to stop, and we'd have to trade horses. So that we could get home and he wouldn't have to be running at a full gallop and hit the barn when he got there. Because the horse wanted to get home. And that's the way that most of us are when it's time to go home after being gone, even if it's a wonderful trip, a wonderful vacation. A couple of weeks ago, we were gone my family and I, to Chihuahua, and we were there for a week for General Council. And we ended up having to stay an extra day because if we had come back on the Friday, the prices of the airline tickets ended up costing us over 8,000 pesos more. So we stayed one more day. And you know what? We said that one day that we were extra, when we were planning it, we can use that day. We're going to be able to explore Chihuahua. We can do this and we could do that. But you know what we did that day? We said, boy, I wish we were home. We wanted to get home. But here, these disciples, they were on their way home, and they were walking so sad because they were disappointed. They were talking with each other in verse 14 about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. Now notice, it doesn't say Jesus caught them running and was out of breath. Jesus was easily able to catch up to these two disciples who were walking in a depressed fashion because Jesus was walking with joy. Jesus was walking at a pace and he was excited because he knew what was happening. And it says that Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" He strikes up a conversation. You know, that wouldn't have been easy when you have people that are walking along like this. You know, they don't look too social. Jesus says, "What are you talking about?" And so what's their first response? When you're sad, any reason to stop moving is a good reason. It's true. So they stood still. Jesus asked them, "What's wrong?" Their faces, what does it say? Downcast. One of them, named Cleophas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. Now, I propose to you, Jesus did know, obviously, what things they were talking about. But the problem is that they had already received word that he was alive. And when he asked what things, he would have hoped to have received the response that Jesus was crucified, but now is alive. He knows he's alive. He's walking. He's standing right in front of them. They've received word from the women. And what do they say? "What things? About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "You don't know about him? He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death and crucified him. But we had hoped." You know, when hope is a past tense, that means that it's now a lack of it. We had hoped, but now we're discouraged. Now we're depressed. We had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They had the word. But there's something about sadness. It's just kind of sticky. It's hard to get out. Now, I can give you a number of different examples. For example, when I was little, I don't know how it happened. I'm sure it was somebody that snuck into my bedroom and did it. But my mother says that I went to bed with gum in my mouth. Somehow, that gum jumped from my mouth into my hair. That's why I say I think somebody came into my bedroom and did it, because I can't figure out how it could move that far. And you know what? In the morning, I didn't have a good time. You know how easy it is to comb gum out of your hair? There's some things that are just sticky, and it's very difficult. And you can try, and all you end up doing is hurting yourself more. Eventually, you're going to have to take some scissors out, probably. And that's the bottom line. You know what? I think sadness is even worse than gum in the hair. It sticks to you. And you can have all kinds of proof in front of you saying that you shouldn't be sad. Everything's going to be turning out fine. It's all okay. But you know what? There's something about sadness. It not only sticks to us, it becomes contagious to other people. You walk into a crowd filled with a bunch of joy in their lives, and you know what they say? One bad apple ruined the... Why? Because there's something very sticky and contagious about sadness. And so they had this sticky, gooey sadness stuck to them. And when the women came and said, "Oh, Jesus is alive," they said, "Oh, yeah, right. If only I could believe what you're saying. The world is so sad right now. It just makes it impossible for me to believe." You know what? You could be in the same situation. You could have a situation where family is falling apart. You could have a situation where health issues are attacking you. You could have a situation where finances don't permit you to do what you were hoping to be able to do this Christmas season. And all of these can cause you to have sadness if you allow them. It becomes very sad and very sticky. It says they went to the tomb early this morning. They didn't find his body. They came home and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Who could believe them, in other words? That's what they said. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. He asked them, how foolish you are. You know, when somebody's sad, sometimes the only way to snap them out of it is to slap them upside the head. Isn't that what Prozac does? I mean, people go and they take medication trying to get some jump start in their system. Or they go to a psychologist who tells them one thing that will astound them, take them back, and snap them out of it. And this is what Jesus is trying to do. He says, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. Now, I do not believe that Jesus was presenting them with a lie, imagining or pretending or telling them that he was going to go further. He already knew he was going to go in with them. I propose to you, this is the way that Jesus was walking. After these two had walked 7 miles, they were so depressed and so tired. And Jesus was still walking with joy and purpose in his steps. They said, whoa, 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 come on back here. Come on back here. They urged him strongly, stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Now, in this moment, it says, then their eyes were opened and they recognized him. They were looking down so long that I don't think they ever bothered to look at his face. They were so discouraged, so depressed, nothing was going to snap him out of it. And when they were looking down, here was Jesus, and he began to break the bread. And they had seen Jesus break bread like that before. The night before he was betrayed, he took bread, and we're going to be doing this in just a moment, and gave thanks. He had a way of doing it. Now, maybe in the culture that you are from, you don't have special ways of breaking bread. One of the things I've noticed in Mexico, Mexicans have their own way of handling, well, it's not bread, it's called a tortilla. There's some Mexicans that they will take and rip the tortilla in half and then use it as protection for their hands because they're going to eat and they're going to take this tortilla with the tortilla and they're going to take it up. Others will tear it into small little pieces and take little bites at a time. There's others that put that tortilla flat out on their hand and they go and they roll it up into this tiny little taquito. And they use it to push the food onto the fork, and they eat it, and they take a bite of tortilla as they go. All of them have a different way. Something about the way Jesus broke bread caused the people around him to recognize him, these two disciples. They immediately recognized him. And they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scripture to us? Wow. Here they were depressed. But Jesus starts to speak to them, and you know what happens? Their heart starts to burn, but they're not going to give it away. They're not going to look at each other and say, wow, do you hear what he's saying? This is pretty good stuff. No. He's sad. I'm sad. It's interesting what this guy is saying. Our heart's burning away, but we're going to cling on to our sadness. That's literally what they're saying. On the way, we were hearing it, and our heart was burning within us. Because they were in the presence of Jesus. They didn't recognize him, but in the presence of Jesus is this joy trying to infuse into them, and they're walking along, no, I got sticky sadness, and I'm going to stick with it. They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. Wait a second. These were the ones that said it's too late to keep walking. What happened? It was too late. Jesus, don't keep going. It's way late now. It's going to get dark in just 5 hours. I don't know how late it was. But when you're sad, things get worse than they are even. And they look around and they say, no, it's not possible. Jesus, stay here. But all of a sudden, when joy is infused into their lives, Now they have a spring in their step. They have joy in their hearts and a purpose. I will propose to you that even though they are tired now because they've already walked 7 miles, that they are like that horse that gained speed going back. Because when they came to Emmaus, they were sad and they were walking slowly with their heads downcast. But now as they turn around, and it says, and they went back. They got up and returned, went at once. They didn't wait till the morning. They didn't say, hey, let's have a good night's sleep. And then, you know what they said? They probably looked at each other and said, you know what? I can't sleep now anyway. Hello? Let's go. Yeah, let's go. The disciples need to hear this. And so they go back, and as they get closer and closer to Jerusalem, I'll propose to you, it's kind of like what I experienced as a child. Their pace started picking up, and they didn't leave the other one in the dust. No, they were both infused with joy because that joy causes something to happen. And so when they get there, it says they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, it's true. Now, how do you think they said it? They came and said to the 11, to the disciples, yeah, we came back because we need to tell you, it's true. It's true. It all happened just like those angels said. It all happened just like the women told us, the angels had told them. It's true. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that they came up to the disciples and they said something like this, it's true! I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake anybody up. But it's true. The Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon. The two told what had happened on the way, and now Jesus was recognized by them, and when he broke the bread. So here's the story. Here's these two disciples, and I've kind of outlined it as we walked along through the scripture, but they were not in any big hurry, as I already mentioned. But Jesus wasn't even running to catch up to them because he has this joy in his life. He has this purpose, and he's going to fulfill that purpose, and he wants his disciples to also have a joy in them. When Jesus gives a command to his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations, he didn't expect them to go out and say, oh, we got to go and work some more. He was expecting them to do something because he said, and behold, I am with you always to the very end of the age. He was giving them an infusion of joy that they were always going to be in his presence. And wherever they went in all of the world, they were going to have this joy that was going to motivate them and propel them to move forward. We need to be those people. We need to be those people who, having joy, we can have this great experience, this great energy coursing through us. You know why? And the scripture teaches it. It's because the disciples recognized Jesus. The disciples recognized Jesus. So I ask you, where's your joy today? You know why believers don't have joy? Because they recognize the low amount of money in their bank account. Because they recognize the pain that they have in their body. Because they recognize that their family is falling apart. They recognize the stresses, the trials, the problems. They spend all this time recognizing the wrong thing. You want to be a person this year, this Christmas season, but on into 2019 and for the rest of your life, all you need to do is recognize Jesus. In the middle of the circumstance, rather than seeing the circumstance, see Jesus. And joy will flood into you. Recognize Jesus and you will have joy. The shepherds out in the field, they were given this great message and they said, let's go. Where? They went to go recognize Jesus. And as they were leaving, they said to everyone, oh, this is great news. That's going to bring great joy. Mary was listening to all of these things, pondering them. Wow, is this the impact that Jesus is going to have in the life of everybody? Yes. It was true at his birth. It was true after his resurrection, and it's true today. You want to get out of the doldrums. You want to get out of the sadness. You want to be able to get all of that sticky sadness out of your life. Take the scissors out and cut it out. Recognize Jesus. And joy comes in. Bow your heads with me if you will.